The Many Talents of Billy Rose. London had its heaviest night air raid of World War II on May 10, 1941, and on the same day the pilot of a German Messerschmitt fighter parachuted into Scotland. The pilot was Rudolf Hess, Hitler's right-hand man and deputy leader of the Nazi Party, on a self-imposed mission to persuade the stubborn British to make peace. He was promptly captured and locked up in the Tower of London, and across the Atlantic, a brash, fast-talking American showman named Billy Rose read the news and had an idea. Dashing off a letter to Lord Halifax, the British ambassador in Washington, he suggested that, for a suitable payment, he be given custody of the notorious Nazi. He would take Hess on a coast-to-coast tour of America and exhibit him to paying customers in an air-conditioned cage. Halifax realised this was a publicity stunt and amiably replied that he was sure Rose was the right man to handle such a tour, and he would pass on the suggestion to the British government. So Billy Rose got his name on the newspaper front pages all over America. He was well satisfied, and in a few days the whole thing was forgotten. But, although Rose, Lord Halifax, and every American knew that the letter was a mere stunt, the story made a deep impression on at least one man, Adolf Hitler. After the war, more than one of his biographers said that one reason for his suicide, when defeat was inevitable, was that he was afraid of being exhibited in a cage by an American showman. Thus Billy Rose, often called the last of the great old-time showmen, even talked his way into a footnote of history. Even without that episode, his reputation would be secure as a real-life Damon Runyon character who rose from poverty to the flashiest multi-millionaire who ever dazzled Broadway. Songwriter, nightclub proprietor, theatrical producer, syndicated columnist, art collector, and colossal stock exchange speculator, cocky, pint-sized Billy Rose was the lot. New Yorkers called him the Midget Midas, midget because he stood only 5'3" in his specially made high-heeled shoes, and Midas because he made more money than Barnum and Ziegfeld put together. The son of a peddler of buttons and sewing materials, he was born William Samuel Rosenberg in a squalid tenement apartment on New York's Lower East Side in 1899. He grew up a skinny, undernourished boy, determined to escape from his dismal environment. During his 2 years at high school, he made himself an expert shorthand writer and was soon earning $50 a week as a stenographer in his spare time. At 17, he entered a national shorthand speed contest, then broke a finger on the day before he was to compete. Undeterred, he stuck a pen through a potato and clutched the potato as he took dictation. Despite the handicap, he achieved 280 words a minute and was hailed as the world champion. When America shortly afterwards entered World War I, the win earned Rosenberg a stenographer's job in the War Industries Board. Soon he was appointed secretary to the chairman, Bernard Baruch, the famous millionaire financier who was to become a close friend of Franklin D. Roosevelt and Winston Churchill. Baruch rounded off his secretary's rough edges in education and manners and gave him a grounding in Wall Street speculation. However, as soon as the war ended, Rosenberg left his job to earn $300 a week touring the country and demonstrating his shorthand writing. He could take dictation simultaneously with both hands in several languages. A year later, at a New York party, he met some popular songwriters and was told they made at least $50,000 a year. He promptly decided he was in the wrong business. For 3 months he spent 9 hours a day in the New York Public Library dissecting hit songs of the previous 30 years. One thing he discovered was that novelty songs were most successful when built around a silly sound, particularly the double O sound. So, having meanwhile changed his name to Billy Rose, he produced a song of his own, Barney Google with the Goo-Goo Googly Eyes. It was a smash hit. He followed it with more successes, and during the next 10 years churned out more than 500 songs. At least 50 were popular hits, including Me and My Shadow, Without a Song, That Old Gang of Mine, and It's Only a Paper Moon, which was still earning him $20,000 a year when he died. In 1929, Billy Rose married the famous stage comedian Fanny Bryce. Soon tiring of being referred to as Mr. Bryce, he determined to make his own name as a spectacular Broadway producer. Within a year he staged a musical, Corned Beef and Roses, and outside the theatre put up his name on a sign as high as a 14-story building. The sign was a Broadway wonder, but on opening night the new producer was admiring it when he heard one passer-by ask another, "Who's Billy Rose?" "That's Fanny Bryce's husband," his companion replied. To complete the humiliation, the show flopped and closed in 10 days. Undaunted, he rewrote it, renamed it Sweet and Low, and put it on again. Once more the public stayed away, so he rewrote it once more, called it Crazy Quilt, and took it on the road for a 9-month tour, which earned him $250,000. After that, Billy Rose never looked back. He was to produce 11 theatrical hits, including Carmen Jones, which ran for 2 years on Broadway, and made more money in the first Broadway season than the Metropolitan Opera in its entire history. With the Broadway profits, Rose plunged into the nightclub business, ending with a string of clubs topped by the glamorous Diamond Horseshoe. In 1936 he went to Texas and was hired at $1,000 a day for 90 days to stage the Fort Worth Frontier Centennial, a monster rodeo-type fair. At a similar fair in Cleveland, he saw a sideshow in which 2 girls swam gracefully to the strains of the Blue Danube Waltz. That was the germ of an idea that mushroomed in Rose's inventive mind into a lavish water spectacle he called the Aquacade, starring 200 beauties swimming to the strains of a 60-piece orchestra. The Billy Rose Aquacade became the top attraction at the 1939 to 1940 New York World's Fair, and later at the San Francisco Fair. More than 10 million people saw it, and it made a profit of more than $1 million. The star of the Aquacade was beautiful former Olympic swimmer Eleanor Holm, who had been dropped from the American team in 1936 for drinking champagne on the Atlantic crossing to Germany. Billy Rose called her Nijinsky in a bathing cap. Soon he was phoning Fanny Bryce, then working in Hollywood, and pleading with her to divorce him so he could marry Aquabelle Holm. Fanny agreed, and Rose married Eleanor Holm in 1941. He bought her a $200,000 townhouse and 2 country estates. He could never be idle. In 1946 he started writing sentimental O. Henry-type short stories and running them in newspapers with advertisements for his nightclubs. They proved so popular that within a few months he was producing a column 3 times a week and syndicating it to hundreds of papers and magazines for $2,000 a week. 4 years later, he suddenly dropped the column, sold his nightclubs, and plunged into a new career as a sensational stock market speculator. Eventually he built up the largest single shareholding, 180,000 shares, of the mammoth American Telephone and Telegraph Company. But his domestic life was not running so smoothly as his money-making. His marriage to Eleanor Holm went on the rocks in 1951 when a blonde showgirl, Joyce Matthews, slashed her wrists in his apartment. Eleanor sued for divorce. The legal proceedings were long and stormy, with Rose naming 5 co-respondents and his wife countering with charges of miserliness. Newspapers dubbed the battle the War of the Roses. Finally a settlement was reached by which Eleanor Holm got a divorce of $200,000 in cash and an annual income of $30,000. Rose and Joyce Matthews married in 1956 and divorced 3 years later. Despite that, they remained inseparable companions until 1961, when they remarried and he gave her $1 million worth of wedding presents. Another divorce followed in 1963. After that, Billy Rose lived alone in one or other of his palatial residencies while he continued to pile up wealth on the stock exchange. In February 1964, he triumphantly told reporters, "I calculate that since last October I've made $8,723 for every hour the New York Stock Exchange was open." The statement brought so many marriage proposals that he publicly announced, "I'm not lonely and I'm not breaking my neck to get married again." Instead, he began giving away some of his wealth. He gave a 105-piece collection of modern sculpture worth $1 million to the State of Israel for display in a garden museum in Jerusalem. He subscribed several $1 million to set up the Billy Rose Foundation to help beautify the gifted in the performing arts. It was explained that if an actress needed her teeth straightened or scars covered by plastic surgery, the foundation would arrange it in secret. A year later, Billy Rose died of pneumonia following heart surgery.